Hey there, now we're ready for yet another application. So we've successfully run stress in MiCADO, we've successfully run an Nginx server, and we've navigated to it. Next we're going to run a WordPress deployment. So WordPress is a very popular content hosting platform, or a blog platform if you will. And to do that, I'm back in my repo that I've pulled here. So this is the Ansible MiCADO repo I've pulled from the MiCADO scale organization in GitHub, and I'm in the testing directory, and now I'm going to navigate to the directory called WordPress. And again, within WordPress, we've got an ADT which has been started for us. It'll be titled WordPress _ whatever cloud service provider you're working with. And if we open up our favorite editor there, we can see that hopefully it looks something like this. And you'll notice, first off, it looks a bit more complex than the last two examples we had. And it looks a bit different because we've got a few more containers. So this is no longer just a single container application. We've actually got three. So there's an NFS server that's running, so a network file system share, that is going to provide some network file sharing. We've got a WordPress MySQL, so MySQL database that's going to be running. I'm going to provide our database for WordPress. And we've got the WordPress front end, which is running on an Apache server down here. So the configuration and the properties within those different containers are very much the same as we've seen before. Certainly a bit more involved because we're passing in some environment variables, we're passing in some labels, and most importantly, we're attaching two what we call requirements in Tosca. And the first requirement you can see here that we're attaching to this WordPress container is the volume. So this is a shared volume between the database and WordPress itself. And you can see that I have some very specific syntax here to define a volume that I want to attach to my container. So I provide the name of the volume that I want to attach, and conveniently directly below it I've actually defined this volume with some properties, and then I specify the location. So this is the mount location that this volume should take on the container. If we look at the volume itself, the properties I'm passing in are specific to creating an NFS volume within Kubernetes. So I need to point to the server IP, and I need to provide a path, but I'm happy to just store everything at the root here. And this server IP, 1096.0240, I've been able to set conveniently up here in my definition of the network file system share. So the server that's running my NFS. And I've specified that I want a very specific IP for that. And since I know it up there, I can feed that in at the lower portion of my Tosca template. The other big difference about this particular ADT is that we now have two different worker nodes. So I have one which is going to be static, which I call the static worker, and one which is going to scale. So I'll have the static worker hosting my backend components. That'll be my network file system share and my MySQL database. Whereas the scaling worker will be hosting the front end, and that will happily scale up and down, where the back end just remains at one instance. In order to specify where I want my different containers to be run, I also use the requirement syntax of Tosca, except down here, instead of specifying a volume, I'm specifying a host, and then I specify whatever worker node I want that to run on. So kind of simple. Again, we're making the same basic changes here, so I'll need to put in with Cloud Sigma, a library drive ID, a public key ID, and the firewall policy ID as well. And I'll need to do that for both of my workers, just in case we wanted to use different library drives, different public keys, or different firewall policies for these two machines. And that makes it really easy to do that. So save our ADT. Let's rename it so that it can work well with our scripts. And if I just call it WordPress.yaml, all should be well. So I've edited my file, I've added in the required IDs, I've renamed it to WordPress.yaml, and now I should be able to launch it again with script number one, which is submit Tosca WordPress. And if I just hit that, I should get the message back that this thread has been launched, and my application deployment is underway. So there we go. There's the 200 response from the submitter. This has been successfully launched. Let's take a quick look at how it looks on our MiCADO dashboard and make sure that everything is properly coming up. And if we go to the Kubernetes dashboard here, we should be able to see much the same. Again, we haven't yet created the Kubernetes workload, the Kubernetes deployment, but that will come soon. In the meantime, I can check my MiCADO system namespace and follow along with the logs of the submitter if I want to see how my Tosca submitter is getting along with deploying this application. So here we can see I'm at this stage here. So the Octopus adapter is starting the execution, and pretty soon as the submitter and as Octopus continue along with this deployment, I should get some messages stating that the launch of my application of WordPress have been completed. I can also see, if I get out a log, this particular log here, I can see some logs for the other components as they're coming up. So perhaps of interest to a lot of people is how MiCADO scales. And we can see all of that if we just look at and follow the policy keeper logs. And those can be quite interesting to watch because we can see internally how MiCADO is deciding to scale up and scale down its services. Let's head back to the nodes section here. We can see that I've got a worker node which is left over from my Nginx deployment, which should get removed as soon as this new deployment comes up. And in my workloads, I can see that I should have, hopefully, right, if I change away from a MiCADO system and go back to my default namespace, I should see that my deployments have at least been created. So I can see the 3 different containers that I described are now created in the form of Kubernetes deployments. And I can see that, of course, their nodes aren't available yet. So Octopus is still working on building the nodes and then adding some contextualization to them so that they can join the Kubernetes cluster. And as soon as those nodes are ready, we can see if they're coming along here. Yeah, I've got my scaling worker is up and it's connected to the cluster. And my static worker is up and just working on probably some last configuration type things. And if I head back to my workloads, I should start to see that my services start to come up as well. And this takes usually a minute or two. If I'm really keen, I should usually be able to follow along with the logs of the particular pod that I'm interested in watching come up. So I'm interested in watching maybe the NFS share come online, so I can follow the logs for that. And I can see that I'm now in the state of container creating. So that means probably the image is getting pulled from the Docker hub and is getting extracted and decompressed, and the container is soon going to come up and configure itself as per whichever properties that I've assigned it. If I'm not so much interested in following along with just dry logs, I can see in my overview that slowly my different deployments are starting to come online. And if we give it another moment, I should see that all of these services eventually do come up. Great, so now we've got all of our deployments that are up and running, and I should be able to have a look at my WordPress pods. So potentially not so interested in my MySQL database, but definitely interested in the WordPress front end. And I can see that it's up and running. I've got some access to see the different steps it's gone through here, and of course the different events, so not having a node available when it first tried to start up. Down in the services area, I can see the services that are assigned to these different containers and deployments. And within WordPress, I should be able to see where my node port is. So I've assigned another node port here, and I can see it's running on 310, port 310. So very simply, if I try to navigate to this and 310, I should get the WordPress welcome page, which prompts me to set up my WordPress blog for the first time. So here we go. It asks for some very basic information. We can go through and fill all that out and use a much better password than I'm using here, and we hit install WordPress, and within a matter of moments, we should have a login screen which we can access, and we should be able to see the basics of our WordPress admin console. And if we want, we can even see our WordPress site. So there it is, a very basic WordPress deployment up and running. Again, going back to the repo or wherever we've pulled this repository to, I can run a number of scripts. I can try to stress the WordPress deployment, and we can watch the front end, and only the front end, scale up and scale down with the HTTP load test. Or if we're tired of WordPress, we can undeploy the whole thing with script number 4. And that will leave us, of course, ready for another application.